So just a disclaimer, I'm a classic Halo fan, and I did not want Sprint to return in Halo Infinite. That said, as we saw in the recent gameplay reveal, Sprint is indeed back, along with Clamber and Sliding. I think Sprint can work in an open world campaign setting, so I'm specifically going to be talking about how Sprint should work in multiplayer. In the first three Halos, combat was defined by always having your gun up and good movement. However, in modern iterations like Halos 4 and 5, the addition of Sprint has taken away from this guns up mentality and slowed down gameplay through use of elongated maps. There's a video by Philip Gann that shows just the amount of time it takes to move around midship with and without Sprint. Here's the clip. Keep in mind, this is Halo 5 versus Halo 2. As we can see in the video, Sprint limits the player's ability to shoot, throw grenades, and look around. Basically anything. You're locked into that animation. In previous Halos, you are able to do all that and still reach your destination in the same amount of time as if you were sprinting in Halo 5. This is a problem. Here's how I think Sprint needs to work in Halo Infinite if we want to return to the classic, core Halo gameplay. Number 1. We need to make Sprint a situational ability and not a necessity by changing the way Sprint fundamentally works. Secondly, we need to design maps around the limited use of Sprint. Keep in mind, these 2 points need to be implemented hand in hand in order for this to function properly. First, I think we need to change Sprint by giving it a startup time to reach max speed. For example, when I first start sprinting, I'm at the 0% movement speed increase. This will keep getting higher and higher the longer I sprint, capping at around 35% or something like that. Either way, the increase in speed should be gradual. This way, players are forced to think about whether or not to commit to using Sprint, especially if the movement speed increase in short durations is negligible. Okay, now that we've established the modified sprint mechanic, how does this in turn affect gameplay? Now this all plays into map design. In Halo, we usually have two types of maps. The small arena type like maps like Guardian and Midship and Lockout, and the bigger ones like Blood Gulch and Valhalla. For smaller maps, we need to keep the maps small. Small. Like in Halo 2 and Halo 3, we need to design it as if Sprint was not in the game. Or at the very least, we need to design maps so that the full sprint, or sprinting at max speed, has limited uses throughout the map. For example, let's say we're playing on Halo 2's midship, and it's the start of the game. I could use Sprint to get to bottom mid a little faster than everyone else. Obviously, this might not be the best idea, because you'd be leaving yourself open to a bunch of grenades and sightlines. But if I were to just prioritize speed, I'd get there first before anyone else. As a player, I'd need to think to myself, is it worth using Sprint in this scenario, given that I might not even reach top speed and I'm leaving myself open to enemies? As the game goes on, we need to make players, especially new players, realize that the map is too small to be sprinting around, and that it's more detrimental than beneficial to use Sprint as your main movement option. There might be situations or instances where Sprint can be used to get somewhere faster, but this shouldn't be the norm, as putting your gun down in a small map like Midship can be very punishing. This way, we give the player options on how they want to move around the map, but make them actively think about whether or not they should commit to using Sprint. Compare this with Halo 5, where Sprint is a necessity on certain parts of the map in order to avoid the dead zone. These dead zones are long lines of sight that punish the player if they're caught in them, making Sprint a must-use to get out of these zones as quick as possible. By making maps smaller and not catering to Sprint, we keep the guns up, fast-paced gameplay that arena-type Halo maps are known for. Now on to bigger maps. Bigger maps can generally stay the same, but still need to offer creative options to get around the map. In the past, Bungie worked around the lack of sprint by adding different unique modes of transportation. You have your standard vehicles like Warthogs and Mongoose, and then you have your built-in traversal options like man cannons and teleports. Now, how does our modified sprint change this? One of the big complaints of newer people trying out the Halo series is that the bigger maps are just too big and sometimes the vehicles aren't always going to be there. I think that's a fair complaint. If you look at Blood Gulch or Valhalla, teleporters and man cannons sometimes don't do enough to lower the downtime in between engagements. Now let's take a closer look at Valhalla and see how gameplay is improved when modified sprint is added. Okay, let's say we're halfway through a match, and the middle hill is being controlled by the enemy team. There are probably 3 or 4 people camping the hill. You check if there are any vehicles available, and let's say they've all been destroyed or are in use. What are our options here? Number 1 is I take the man cannon and I die as I land because there are 4 people camping mid and they're probably going to grenade the spot where I landed. I also have no cover when I land. Number 2 is that I wait for vehicles to respawn and I try to snag a kill from base. Okay, and number 3 is I either walk to the left or right cave and try to take a closer engagement. I think sprint can primarily help in these types of situations, especially when I choose to use option number 3. Modified sprint is simply a way for the player to get from point A to point B in a quicker fashion. However, sprint can't be used as a quick escape, especially when I get caught in the open because of the time it takes to hit max speed. You still have 2 ways to get to the middle of the map. The less safe man cannon way, and the safer way through the caves on the right and the left side. But at least now, the time it takes to get to the cave is significantly lower, whereas in Halo 3 or in other Halos, you'd be walking at normal speed to get there. The man cannon should and always will be the faster option, but at least we're speeding up an option that was tedious to use in the past. Now, I don't know the exact acceleration that sprint needs to have, but you guys get the gist. When all is said and done, the design philosophy for maps needs to change. For smaller maps, we need to make it so that sprint is not a necessity for certain parts of the map. And for bigger ones, sprint should not be the only option for the player to get around the map. But sprint needs to be used to lower the downtime that was in previous Halo games, when those built-in map options, like man cannons and teleports, are either not viable or unsafe to use. Now, just a disclaimer before I end. I still think that sprint does not have a place in Halo. I don't think that we need to have sprint, but I think these issues could be solved with a faster base movement speed. However, if 343 really wants to push for sprint, I think this is the best way to go about it. I hope we can get someone at 343 to look at this, and if you guys have any thoughts or comments on my suggestion, I'd love to hear it down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.